She stood at the side of a forgotten road, the rain washing away the last of her hope. Melanie Caldwell and her world had just fallen apart. Little did she know that the luxury car that had stopped in her direction in that storm was driven by a man who was a force of nature. He had rescued her, a simple act of kindness from a stranger. But he was no mere stranger. He was the mighty Judge Sebastian Downey, a man of immense power, respected by all, whose age was a mere fact, challenged by a vitality that was at once intimidating and impossibly sensual. This is the story of a chance rescue that became a storm of love and romance. If you believe that fate can intervene in the most unexpected moments, subscribe to the channel and join our family. And tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from today? I'd love to know. It all began with the sound of failure. A gut-wrenching sputter, a final pathetic cough, and then silence. The engine of Melanie's 10-year-old sedan had given up, leaving her stranded on a winding two-lane road as the sky, a bruised and angry purple, finally tore itself open. The rain didn't just fall. It assaulted the world. A relentless, blinding sheet that turned the asphalt into a black mirror and the surrounding woods into a menacing blur of shadows. Just an hour earlier, she had sat in a sterile, glass-walled boardroom, her design portfolio, her heart and soul bound in leather, dismissed with a polite corporate smile. "We're looking for a more established aesthetic," they had said. It was the third and final rejection of the week, the one that meant rent would be late again. The drive home was supposed to be a retreat into self-pity, but the dead car had turned it into a full-blown crisis. Her phone, of course, was dead. The world, it seemed, had conspired to bring her to her absolute lowest point. She huddled in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, the drumming of the rain on the roof a frantic, mocking rhythm. But the cold was already seeping in, a damp chill that promised to get worse. With a sigh of resignation, she pulled her thin jacket tighter, pushed open the door and stepped out into the deluge. The shock of the cold water was immediate and absolute, soaking her jeans and plastering her blouse to her skin in seconds. She stood by the side of her useless car, a solitary figure of despair, invisible in the growing twilight. Cars were rare on this road, and in this weather she might as well have been on another planet. A sob of pure frustration caught in her throat. She was 25 years old, and she had never felt so utterly, terrifyingly alone. It was then that she saw them, two pinpricks of light, cutting through the grey curtain of rain. They grew steadily, resolving into the headlights of a car that moved with a silent, predatory grace. It was long, black, and expensive, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong on a road like this. It slowed as it approached, its powerful engine a low, almost imperceptible hum beneath the roar of the storm. The car glided to a stop a few feet in front of her, its presence an island of impossible stillness in the chaos. For a moment nothing happened. Melanie's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic mix of hope and fear. Was this salvation, or a different kind of danger? The driver's side door opened and a figure emerged. He was holding a wide black umbrella that seemed to command its own pocket of dryness. He moved with an unhurried confidence that defied the storm raging around him. He wasn't a young man, but the thought of him being old was instantly dismissed. He was ageless, timeless. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that seemed to repel the water. His hair was a distinguished thick silver, cut with precision. As he stepped into the ambient glow of his own headlights, she saw his face and her breath caught. It was a face of stark, handsome angles and controlled authority. A strong jaw, a straight nose, lips that were firm and unsmiling. He was, she thought with a strange sense of detachment, magnificent. He looked like a Roman sculpture come to life, weathered by wisdom but radiating power. He walked toward her, the umbrella held steady, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the wet pavement. His eyes, a piercing, intelligent gray, swept over her, taking in her drenched clothes, her broken-down car, her shivering form. It wasn't a look of pity. It was a calm, swift assessment of the situation. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she was now partially shielded by his umbrella. "You seem to be in some trouble," he said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone, a voice that carried an innate authority without needing to be raised. It was the calmest sound she had ever heard. "My car. It just died," she managed, her teeth chattering. He glanced at her car with a dismissive, expert eye. "Hey, it's not going anywhere tonight." He then met her gaze again, and his look was direct, unwavering. "It's not safe for you to stay here. I will take you into the city." It was not an offer. It was a statement of fact, a decision that had already been made. There was no menace in it, only an unnerving certainty. He was a man accustomed to taking control. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at her to refuse, to not get into a car with a stranger, no matter how distinguished. But her body betrayed her. She was numb with cold, her mind a landscape of defeat. The world had just ripped her professional dreams apart and left her stranded in a storm. This man, this phantom of quiet power, was offering an escape from the immediate misery. He seemed to sense her hesitation. He didn't press, didn't argue. He simply stood there, a bastion of stillness, waiting. It was his patience, his complete lack of urgency, that ultimately disarmed her. With a shuddering breath that felt like both a surrender and a prayer, she nodded. "Okay," he simply nodded back, then opened the passenger door of his car, holding the umbrella over her as she slid into the seat. The interior was a cavern of soft black leather and polished wood, smelling of wealth and something clean and masculine, like bergamot and cedar. He closed the door with a soft, heavy thud that sealed out the storm and the life she had known. As he walked around to the driver's side, she watched him, a man who moved with the weight of the world on his shoulders, but seemed unburdened by it. He was a complete enigma, a dangerous, beautiful, terrifying enigma, and she was now, for better or worse, in his hands. The journey back to the city was wrapped in a thick, charged silence. The only sounds were the hypnotic rhythm of the windshield wipers and the soft rush of the tires on wet asphalt. Melanie sat rigidly, a million questions screaming in her mind, but an exhausted silence held her captive. She was intensely aware of him beside her. He drove with an effortless, focused precision, his large, capable hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. In the dim light of the dashboard, his profile looked as if it were carved from stone, a study in controlled power. She watched him, trying to piece together who he could be. A CEO, a politician, everything about him, his clothes, his car, his voice, his bearing, spoke of a life lived at the highest echelons of power and influence. He seemed completely unconcerned by the silence. He didn't ask her name, where she had been, or what had happened. He simply drove, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. The lack of questions was both a relief and deeply unsettling. It was as if her personal details were irrelevant to the task at hand, which was simply to remove her from a dangerous situation. He was a problem solver, and she was the problem currently in his passenger seat. They arrived at a sleek, impossibly tall glass tower that pierced the stormy sky, a monument to wealth that made her old apartment building look like a shoebox. He drove into a private underground garage and parked in a reserved spot. "Come," he said, and it was that same quiet command. He led her to a private elevator that opened directly into his apartment. The doors slid open, and the space that revealed itself stole Melanie's breath. It wasn't an apartment. It was a kingdom in the clouds. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides revealed a panoramic, godlike view of the storm-ravaged city below, its lights glittering like a scattered handful of diamonds. The decor was a masterpiece of masculine elegance, dark woods, supple leather, and cold, polished chrome, all softened by a warm, ambient light that seemed to emanate from the very walls. It was vast, silent, and impeccably clean. It was the home of a man who valued order, control, and solitude. He moved through the space with an easy, familiar grace, his presence filling the vast rooms. He shrugged off his suit jacket, tossing it over the back of a leather armchair with a casualness that seemed out of character. "You need a hot shower and dry clothes," he said, his tone practical. He led her down a long hallway to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment. Her cavernous bathroom of black marble awaited, with a rainfall shower and a collection of expensive, subtly scented oils and soaps. He opened a closet and pulled out a set of new clothes. "These should fit more or less," he said, placing a simple pair of grey cashmere sweatpants and a soft black t-shirt on the king-sized bed. It was all done with a detached efficiency that was both comforting and deeply intimidating. He was solving her problems with the casual ease of a man for whom problems were merely inconveniences to be managed. "There's whiskey on the bar in the living room if you'd like some. Help yourself to anything," he said, standing in the doorway. He was a formidable figure, seeming to belong to this world of silent luxury as much as she felt alien to it. For a moment, his gaze lingered on her, a brief, unreadable assessment as if he were cataloguing her shivering form, her damp hair. "Take your time," he added, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "The storm isn't going anywhere, neither are you." Before she could respond, he turned and left, the door clicking softly shut behind him. Left alone, Melanie felt the full weight of the day crash down on her. She walked on trembling legs to the vast window, looking down at the city she loved, now a wounded, weeping landscape. The opulence surrounding her felt like a cage, a beautiful prison that highlighted everything she wasn't. She was a creator of chaotic, emotional art. This place was about control, order, and a level of wealth she couldn't comprehend. The hot water of the shower felt like a benediction, washing away the grime of the road, but not the chill that had settled deep in her bones. She slipped into the clothes he had given her. They were impossibly soft against her skin, the cashmere a gentle caress. They smelled faintly of him, that clean, cedar-like scent. Wearing a stranger's clothes in a stranger's home, her own life a submerged memory of a broken-down car and a failed meeting. She felt a pang of such profound dislocation, it nearly brought her to her knees. Who was this man who could pluck a woman from a disaster and place her in a palace, all without a word of personal inquiry? She padded barefoot across the thick rug, the silence of the penthouse amplifying the frantic beating of her own heart. She was safe, she was warm, she was dry, and she had never felt more lost in her entire life. She was a guest in a gilded cage, cared for by a silent warden whose motives were a complete mystery. The gratitude she felt was tangled with a deep, unsettling fear of the unknown, of the unspoken debt she was incurring with every breath she took in his rarefied air. After her shower, wrapped in the impossible softness of his clothes, Melanie felt a desperate need to not hide away in the guest room like a frightened mouse. She needed to face her mysterious benefactor. Taking a deep breath, she walked back into the vast, open-plan living area. She found him standing before the wall of windows, a heavy crystal tumbler of amber liquid cradled in his hand. He had changed out of his suit into a simple pair of black trousers and a dark grey cashmere sweater that perfectly matched the one he'd given her. The casual clothes did nothing to diminish his powerful presence. If anything, they amplified it, revealing the athletic, muscular build that his tailored suit had only hinted at. He looked less like a phantom of the storm and more like what he was, a man of immense power and discipline at home in his sky-high fortress. He turned as he sensed her presence, his grey eyes meeting hers with the same unnerving intensity as before. But this time, she saw something else flicker there, a flicker of something human. Not pity, but perhaps a quiet acknowledgement of their strange, shared predicament. "Feeling better?" he asked, his voice as calm and steady as the new day. "Yes, thank you," she said, her voice small in the vast space. "For everything. The clothes, the shower, the rescue." He gave a slight nod, dismissing her gratitude as if it were an unnecessary formality. He gestured with his glass towards the bar. "Can I offer you a drink? It might help with the chill." She hesitated, then nodded. "Please." A drink felt like a necessary anchor in this surreal situation. He moved to the bar, his movements economical and precise. He selected another crystal tumbler, dropped in a single large sphere of ice, and poured the same amber liquid over it. He handed it to her, and as he did, their fingers brushed. A brief, accidental contact that sent a surprising jolt of warmth through her system, a warmth that had nothing to do with the whiskey. "I took the liberty of making some calls," he said, turning his gaze back to the city below. "I have a service that will retrieve your car in the morning and take it to a reputable garage. They will assess the damage and report back to me." He delivered this news with a calm detachment that was both chilling and strangely merciful. No pity, only facts and solutions. Melanie sank onto a plush leather sofa, the cold glass a fragile weight in her hands. It was one thing to be stranded. It was another to have the entire situation so effortlessly managed by a man she didn't know. "You don't have to do that," she said, the words feeling feeble even as she spoke them. "It's already done," he replied simply, leaving no room for argument. He took a seat in an armchair opposite her, the vast expanse of a modern rug between them. "Now," he said, his gaze finally settling on her, analytical and direct. "Tell me your name." The question, so basic and yet so long in coming, surprised her. "It's Melanie. Melanie Caldwell." "Sebastian Downey," he offered in return, the first piece of personal information he had volunteered. "It's a pleasure to formally meet you, Melanie Caldwell." The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the distant, muted sound of the storm. It was not an empty silence. It was heavy, filled with unspoken things. She looked at him, truly looked at him, trying to see past the expensive sweater and the aura of untouchable authority. His grey eyes were watching her, not with judgment but with an unwavering analytical focus. He was a puzzle she couldn't begin to solve, a man of staggering contradictions. He had saved her from the storm, only to place her in this different kind of turmoil, one of obligation and uncertainty, in a world so far removed from her own that it felt like another planet. Driven by a need to fill the silence, to assert her own existence in this space that threatened to swallow her, she began to talk. She told him about her day, the disastrous meeting, the crushing feeling of failure. The words tumbled out, more honest and raw than she had intended. She spoke of her passion for design, the struggle of being a freelancer, the constant hustle, the dream of one day creating things that were beautiful and meaningful. He listened with an unnerving stillness, his gaze never leaving her face. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer false platitudes or empty reassurances. He simply absorbed her words, and she realized this man, who lived a life of such order and logic, was captivated by her world of chaotic emotion and raw creativity. It was as if she were speaking a foreign language he had never heard, but somehow instinctively understood. When she finished, her confession hanging in the air between them, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Passion is not a weakness, Melanie," he said, his voice low and steady. "It is a form of courage. To dedicate one's life to creating beauty in a world that so often values only utility, that requires a strength most people do not possess." His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. No one had ever articulated her struggle, her belief, so perfectly. He didn't just hear her, he understood her. He saw her. In that moment she saw a flicker of a deep, profound loneliness in his eyes, a loneliness that mirrored her own, and her heart gave an unexpected, painful lurch of empathy. He was a man, trapped in his own gilded cage, a man who understood the value of passion precisely because his own life, she suspected, was so devoid of it. The formidable stranger was becoming a man, and that she knew was far more dangerous. The storm raged on through the night and into the next day, effectively trapping them in Sebastian's sky-high fortress. The city below was a landscape of grey mist and blurred lights. The enforced proximity created a strange new intimacy between them. The polite distance of the first night gave way to an easy, quiet companionship. They shared a simple breakfast of toast and coffee, the conversation light, focusing on neutral topics like books and travel. Yet underneath it all, a current of awareness hummed constantly. Melanie was acutely aware of him in every moment, the way he moved through his kitchen with silent efficiency, the way the morning light caught the silver at his temples, the low, resonant sound of his voice. In the afternoon, to combat the growing sense of cabin fever, Melanie pulled out the small sketchbook she always carried in her purse. It was her sanctuary, the place she translated her thoughts into lines and shapes. She sat curled on one end of the massive sofa, drawing, losing herself in the one thing that was truly hers. She sketched the view from his window, the play of light and shadow on the chrome and leather of his furniture, trying to capture the feeling of the space, its power, its elegance, its profound solitude. Sebastian had retreated to his home office, a room she had only glimpsed lined from floor to ceiling with imposing leather-bound books. But after an hour, he emerged, holding 2 mugs of tea. He placed one on the table beside her, a silent offering. Instead of retreating, however, he paused, his gaze falling on her sketchbook. "May I?" he asked, his voice quiet. Hesitantly, she nodded and handed it to him. She felt a surge of vulnerability as he took it. Her sketches were her most private thoughts. He sat in the armchair opposite her and began to flip through the pages, his expression unreadable, his focus absolute. He didn't rush. He studied each page with the same intense concentration he had applied to her story the night before. He lingered on her designs for furniture, her architectural doodles, her quick expressive sketches of people in cafes. Finally he looked up, his grey eyes holding a new expression she hadn't seen before, genuine, unadulterated respect. "You are remarkably talented," he said, and the simple, direct statement held more weight than any effusive compliment she had ever received. "Thank you," she said, her cheeks warming. He turned back to a specific page, one where she had sketched a single elegant chair, a design that was modern but with a sense of classic warmth. "This one," he said, tapping the page. "The lines are clean, but it's not cold. It has character. It invites you to sit. Most modern design just commands you to admire it." He had seen it. He had seen exactly what she was trying to achieve. Emboldened, she moved from the sofa to kneel on the rug beside his chair, leaning in to point out a detail. "That's the key," she said, her voice filled with the passion he had praised. "It's the slight curve here in the leg. It softens the geometry." She was so lost in explaining her design that she didn't realize how close they were. Her hand was resting on the page, just an inch from his. Her shoulder was almost touching his knee. She could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell that intoxicating scent of cedar and bergamot. She looked up to see if he was following her explanation, and her words died in her throat. He wasn't looking at the sketchbook. He was looking at her. His gaze was heavy, intense, and the analytical coolness was gone, replaced by something raw and burning. His eyes dropped from her eyes to her mouth and held there. The air grew thick, electric. The world narrowed to the few inches of space between them. She saw his pupils dilate, saw the muscle in his strong jaw clench. He leaned in. A slow, deliberate movement. 1 inch, then another. She could feel his breath on her lips, warm and tasting faintly of tea. Her own lips parted in a silent, unconscious invitation. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. It was going to happen. It was inevitable, a force of nature as powerful as the storm outside. And then his phone, sitting on the table beside him, buzzed. A sharp, intrusive sound that shattered the spell. It was like a switch had been flipped. Sebastian blinked, and the raw desire in his eyes was instantly shuttered, replaced by his usual mask of cool control. He pulled back so abruptly it felt like a physical blow. He glanced at the phone, his expression tightening with annoyance. "I apologize," he said, his voice a little hoarse, strained. He stood up, creating a chasm of distance between them. "I need to take this." He didn't look at her as he walked away toward his office. Melanie remained kneeling on the floor, her body trembling, the ghost of his lips still burning on hers. The almost moment, the unfulfilled promise. She brought a shaky hand to her mouth, her entire being aching with a new, sharp, and undeniable hunger. She couldn't stop thinking about what had almost happened, and she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he couldn't stop either. The rest of the day was an exercise in polite torture. Sebastian remained in his office for hours. When he finally emerged, he was distant, formal. He had rebuilt his walls, higher and thicker than ever. He spoke of practical matters, the status of her car, the weather forecast, his voice devoid of the warmth that had been growing between them. Melanie played along, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. The easy intimacy they had begun to build had vanished, replaced by an awkward, painful awareness of the line they had almost crossed. That night, sleep eluded her. She tossed and turned in the luxurious guest bed, her mind replaying the almost kiss, the look in his eyes, the jarring buzz of his phone, the stress of the past few days. The emotional whiplash of her encounter with Sebastian finally caught up with her. She drifted into a restless sleep, only to be plunged into a nightmare. She was back in her car, the water rising around her, cold and suffocating. The faces of the clients who had rejected her swirled in the murky depths, laughing. The water filled her lungs, choking the very breath, the very creativity from her body. She awoke with a strangled gasp, sitting bolt upright in bed, her body trembling, the borrowed t-shirt clinging to her skin with cold sweat. The phantom sensation of drowning was so real she could barely breathe. The scream that had escaped her was little more than a choked whisper, but in the profound silence of the penthouse, it was as loud as a siren. A moment later, a soft knock came at her door, followed by Sebastian's low, concerned voice. "Melanie, are you all right?" He didn't wait for a response, but opened the door slowly, stepping into the darkness of her room. He was a tall, broad silhouette against the ambient light from the hallway, dressed in a simple t-shirt and pajama. Pants, a far more casual and vulnerable image than she was used to. His impressive physique was even more apparent without the armor of his expensive clothes. She couldn't speak, could only wrap her arms around herself, trying to stop the violent shivering. He didn't turn on the light, for which she was grateful. Instead, he moved quietly to the side of the bed and sat on the edge, maintaining a respectful distance. Yet his presence was a solid, calming weight in the tumultuous darkness. "A nightmare?" he asked gently, his voice a soothing balm on her raw nerves. She could only nod, her throat tight with unshed tears. He didn't offer empty platitudes like it was only a dream. Instead, he just sat with her in the quiet, his stillness a powerful anchor against the storm raging inside her. After a long moment, he began to speak, his voice low and steady, telling her about the city below them. He described the way the lights of the bridges reflected on the dark water of the river, the endless stream of headlights moving along the expressways, the silent, sleeping lives in the buildings all around them. He wasn't distracting her. He was grounding her, pulling her out of the suffocating water of her dream and back into the solid reality of the here and now. His voice was a lifeline. Melanie found herself focusing on its deep, calm cadence, letting it wash over her, cleansing the fear and panic from her mind. The trembling slowly subsided, and her breathing evened out. She felt the tight knot of terror in her chest begin to loosen. He didn't touch her, didn't offer a physical comfort that might have crossed a line. Yet she felt more cared for, more protected in that moment than she had in a very long time. His respect for her space was a form of intimacy all its own. He stayed until the first hints of dawn began to soften the eastern sky, his quiet monologue about the city, a gentle lullaby for her fractured soul. When he finally stood to leave, the room was no longer dark, but filled with a soft, promising light. "Try to get some more sleep," he said, his voice barely a whisper at the door. She watched him go. This man of immense control and hidden depths, who had calmed her storm without so much as touching her hand. As the door clicked shut, she was left with a single, startling realization. The attraction she felt for him, the desire from the almost kiss, was still there, but it was now intertwined with something far more potent and far more terrifying, a profound sense of safety. She felt safe with him, and that, she knew, was the most dangerous feeling of all. The morning after her nightmare, the atmosphere in the apartment had shifted again. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a new, fragile intimacy. The shared vulnerability of the night had broken down the walls he had tried to rebuild. When Sebastian emerged from his room, he found Melanie in the kitchen making coffee, a quiet act of domesticity that felt both strange and perfectly natural. He paused in the doorway, watching her. In the soft morning light, with her hair in a messy bun and wearing his clothes, she looked small and beautiful and utterly out of place in his sterile, perfect kitchen. And he knew, with a certainty that struck him to his core, that he never wanted her to leave. "Good morning," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. She turned, a small, shy smile on her lips. "Good morning. I hope you don't mind. I figured out your coffee machine." "I'm impressed," he said, a genuine smile touching his own lips, a rare event that transformed his severe, handsome features, making him look younger, more approachable. "It usually intimidates visitors." "I'm a designer," she countered lightly. "I appreciate complex machinery." The easy banter felt miraculous after the tension of the previous day. They drank their coffee, standing by the windows, watching the city awaken, the storm having finally passed. The silence between them was no longer charged with unspoken desire, but with a comfortable, shared understanding. "My car service is bringing your keys back this morning," he said. "The garage says it was a simple alternator failure. It will be ready by this afternoon. The news should have been a relief. It meant she could go home, resume her life. Instead, a leaden weight settled in her stomach. It meant she had to leave. Leave him. She looked away from him, out at the now clear sky. "So I guess my time as your houseguest is over," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "Melanie," he said, his voice low and serious. She turned to face him. He had moved closer, and the space between them was now charged with all the electricity of their almost kiss, but deepened by the intimacy of the past night. "I don't want you to go," he said. The words simple, direct, and devastatingly honest. Her heart hammered in her chest. "I have to," she whispered. "I can't just live in your apartment." "Why not?" he challenged softly, taking another step closer. Now they were only a breath apart. He slowly raised his hand, his fingers hesitating for a fraction of a second, before gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, a spark that ignited a fire that had been smoldering between them for days. "This is happening too fast," she breathed, even as she leaned into his touch. "I don't know each other." "I know that you are passionate and courageous," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, his touch impossibly tender for such a powerful, controlled man. "I know that you see the world in a way that I have forgotten how to. I know that when you walked into my life, you brought a light into a place that has been dark for a very long time. That is what I know, and it is enough." Every rational thought in Melanie's head evaporated, replaced by a singular, overwhelming need. And then he lowered his head, and his lips met hers. It wasn't a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a kiss of certainty, of release, a surrender to the days of pent-up tension, unspoken attraction, and undeniable connection. It was desperate and hungry, yet also impossibly tender, filled with all the things they hadn't been able to say. His other hand came up to cup the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair as he pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, staking his claim. Melanie melted against him, her hands coming up to grip the soft cashmere of his sweater as she returned the kiss with equal unrestrained fervor. It was a kiss of collision, of two worlds, two lonely souls finally crashing into one another. It was the storm and the sanctuary, the rescue and the surrender, all culminating in this single explosive moment of contact. His lips were firm and demanding, yet they were also searching, asking a question she was more than ready to answer. She poured all of her longing, her gratitude, and her blossoming love into her response, letting him taste the truth on her lips. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, they simply stared at each other, the air crackling between them. The dam had broken. The world seemed to tilt and then resettle on a new axis. The powerful, enigmatic judge Sebastian Downey and the stranded, hopeful designer Melanie Caldwell had disappeared. In their place were just a man and a woman, standing in the morning sun, on the precipice of something terrifying and beautiful. The rescue was over, but their story had just begun. The kiss was not an end, but a beginning. It rewrote all the rules. The world outside, with its broken-down cars and missed appointments, ceased to exist. Their universe shrank to the confines of the luxurious apartment, a sanctuary suspended above the city. The days that followed were a fever dream, a haze of discovery and passion that enveloped the silent penthouse, filling its empty hallways with a life it had not known in decades. The polite distance of a rescuer and his charge dissolved completely, replaced by the intoxicating intimacy of new lovers. Sebastian, the man of discipline and control, surrendered to the beautiful anarchy of feeling. Melanie saw a side of him the world would never know, a side he had perhaps kept hidden even from himself. She discovered his dry, wicked sense of humor, which would appear in a sudden glint in his grey eyes. She discovered his surprising passion for classic black and white films, and they spent an entire afternoon on his plush sofa, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, watching old movies as the city bustled beneath them. He was a man who had spent his life judging the world, and now he looked at her with nothing but a sort of wondering admiration, as if she were a rare and beautiful creature he was privileged to observe. The penthouse, once a fortress of solitude, became their sanctuary. Melanie, who had felt so small and out of place, began to leave her own small marks on the space. She left a book on his nightstand, her favorite mug by the coffee machine, the scent of her perfume lingering on his pillows. And Sebastian, a man whose life was a monument to order, seemed to not only tolerate this gentle invasion but to cherish it. He would watch her, a small genuine smile on his lips, as she hummed to herself while cooking in his kitchen, infusing the sterile professional space with the chaotic, delicious aromas of home. Their passion was a slow, steady flame that grew hotter with each passing day. There were stolen kisses in the hallway, long deep kisses against the cool glass of the floor-to-ceiling windows, tender kisses on her forehead as they watched the sunrise. The desire between them was an undercurrent, ever-present, making every touch, every glance electrifying. He was a patient, reverent lover. Having lived so much of his life in control, he seemed to find a profound pleasure in the slow, deliberate art of surrender. Each caress was intentional, as if he were memorizing the texture of her skin, the curve of her hip, the silk of her hair. One night, after a simple dinner they had prepared together, he led her to his library. It was a room that exuded his power, with walls lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound law books. He lit a fire in the stone fireplace and poured 2 glasses of a rare single-malt scotch. He didn't touch her. Instead, he sat in a leather armchair across from her and simply began to talk. He told her stories from his life, not of his career, but of the man. He spoke of his childhood, of the immense pressure of his family name, of a youthful passion for sailing he had long since abandoned. He spoke with an honesty so raw and vulnerable it made her heart ache. "I spent so many years becoming the man I was expected to be," he confessed, his gaze lost in the flickering flames, "that I forgot to be the man I simply was." He then looked at her, his eyes filled with a profound emotion. "You remind me of him, the man I was before the robes and the gavels, the man who knew how to feel." That night he didn't guide her to the guest room. He led her, his hand warm and firm in hers, up the silent staircase to the master suite. It was a space of quiet, masculine luxury, dominated by a huge bed and another wall of windows offering a breathtaking view of the glittering city. He kissed her at the door, a long, slow kiss full of unspoken promises. "I want to wake up with you," he whispered against her lips. "I don't want to say good night from down the hall ever again." His respect for her boundaries, the slow, deliberate pace he had set, had been the deepest form of seduction. He had given her time, space, showing her that what he wanted wasn't just her body but her soul, her trust. And now, she was ready to give him everything. Lying in his arms, skin to skin, she felt not like a rescued girl but like a cherished woman. She had found a love that seemed impossible, a love with a man of depth, honor, and a hidden passion that he revealed only to her. She was in love with Sebastian Downey, the man who taught her the beauty of stillness, just as she had taught him the beauty of movement. She was happy, complete, and she was blissfully, dangerously ignorant of the storm their love was about to unleash upon the world. The first clue that their idyllic bubble was about to burst came subtly. A week into her unofficial residency at his penthouse, Sebastian had to attend a formal charity dinner. "It's a necessary evil of my position," he explained, his tone apologetic. "Endless speeches and terrible food. I wish you could come, but it would complicate things." Melanie understood, or thought she did. He was a private man. She didn't press the issue. That evening, as she was enjoying the rare luxury of having the enormous apartment to herself, she idly scrolled through a celebrity news website on her laptop. And there he was. A photo of him, taken just an hour ago, arriving at the gala. He looked devastatingly handsome in a tuxedo, but his face was the cold, unreadable mask of his public persona. The caption read, "The city's most formidable jurist, the Honorable Judge Sebastian Downey, arrives solo at the annual Law Society Benevolent Fund Gala." Melanie froze, her fingers hovering over the trackpad. The Honorable Judge Sebastian Downey. She had known he was a judge. He had told her so. But in the cocoon of their intimacy, it had become an abstract fact, like his age. It was a title, a job, something he did, not something he was. Seeing it there in black and white, linked to his public image, the formidable jurist, was a jolt of ice water. A sense of unease, a feeling she had suppressed, began to creep over her. She realized with a startling clarity that she didn't just not know his world, she didn't even know the true scale of his identity within it. Driven by a sudden and desperate need to understand, she did what she had avoided doing. She opened a new browser tab and typed his full name into the search bar. The results hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't a trickle of information. It was a tsunami. The screen filled with links, Profiles in national law journals, newspaper articles spanning decades, video clips of interviews where he was grilled on controversial rulings. She clicked on the first link, a lengthy profile in a major magazine. The title read, "The Downey Doctrine Inside the Mind of America's Most Uncompromising Judge." She read, and with each word the man she knew, the tender, vulnerable lover who held her through nightmares and laughed at her bad jokes, began to dissolve, replaced by a figure of almost mythic proportions. She read of his reputation as a brilliant legal mind and a ruthless constitutional purist. He was known for his blistering dissents, his intolerance for legal theatrics, and his legendary incorruptibility. He was respected by his allies, feared by his opponents. He was an institution, a pillar of the federal judiciary. She read about his family, a dynasty of senators and judges stretching back to the founding of the country. Old money, entrenched power. The penthouse wasn't just an apartment. It was a symbol of a legacy she couldn't even comprehend. She saw photos of him with presidents, with foreign dignitaries, always with that same stern, unreadable expression. He seemed untouchable, a figure carved from granite. The most painful discovery was an older Society column that speculated on his personal life. "Judge Downey remains Washington's most elusive bachelor," it read. "After a brief failed marriage in his youth, his only mistress has been the law. Friends say he lives a life of monastic discipline. Any woman hoping to capture the judge's heart would have to contend not only with his formidable intellect, but with a life lived under the constant, unforgiving glare of the public eye. The unforgiving glare of the public eye." The words seemed to leap off the screen and slap her. She slammed the laptop shut, her hands shaking. A cold nausea rose in her throat. It wasn't that he had lied. It was that the omission was so vast, so monumental, that it felt like a betrayal of the intimacy they had built. The Sebastian she loved was real, but he was only a small part of a much larger, more intimidating truth. She was falling in love with a man, while the world knew a legend, and the legend's shadow threatened to swallow her whole. How could she, a freelance designer with a broken-down car and a mountain of student debt, possibly fit into that world? The idea was absurd. She felt naive, a fool who had mistaken a king's kindness for a permanent place in his kingdom. The joy, the intimacy, the fairy tale feeling of the past week turned to ash. The chasm between them, which she thought love had bridged, reappeared wider and deeper than ever. It wasn't a chasm of years, but of worlds, and the love that had made her feel so safe now filled her with an overwhelming dread. When Sebastian returned to the penthouse late that night, he found her sitting in the dark, the city lights casting long shadows across the room. He sensed the change in the atmosphere immediately. The warm, welcoming energy of his home was gone, replaced by a cold, tense silence. "Melanie?" he said, his voice cautious as he switched on a soft lamp. "So you're still awake?" "We need to talk," she said, her voice flat, devoid of its usual warmth. He saw the closed laptop on the coffee table, and a look of profound regret crossed his face. He knew. He loosened his bow tie and sat in the armchair opposite her, not reaching for her, giving her the space she was clearly demanding. "You saw the article." "I saw everything," she corrected him, her voice trembling slightly. "The articles, the interviews, the formidable jurist, the uncompromising judge. I saw the man the rest of the world sees, and I have to admit I don't recognize him. He is a part of me," he admitted, his voice low. "He is not all of me, but he's the most important part, isn't he?" She countered, the pain finally bleeding into her voice. "He's the reason you live in a fortress, the reason you couldn't take me to a dinner party. He's the reason our entire relationship has existed in this bubble, and you never told me the extent of it. You let me fall in love with Sebastian, the quiet, gentle man who lives in this apartment. You never warned me I was also falling for Judge Downey, a man who lives on a public stage I could never hope to stand on. That was never my intention," he said, his voice deepening with an emotion she couldn't quite read. "This place, this is my sanctuary. The one place I don't have to be the judge. The one place I can be myself. I didn't hide it to deceive you, Melanie. I hid it to protect this, to protect us." His words, meant to be reassuring, only confirmed her worst fears. "So I am a secret," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I'm the escape, the pleasant diversion from your real high-stakes life, the woman you keep locked away in your ivory tower. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? It makes me feel small. It makes me feel temporary. You are the most permanent thing in my life, he said, the intensity in his voice rising. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Do you not understand? Before you, this apartment was just a collection of expensive things. My life was a series of obligations. You are the only thing that is real. But it's not real if it can't survive outside these windows, she cried, tears of frustration finally welling in her eyes. Love can't exist in a vacuum, Sebastian. What happens when someone takes a picture of us? What happens when the world you live in finds out about me? The freelance designer with no family name, no Ivy League degree. Will you still think I'm real then, or will I become a complication to your career? The pain on his face was palpable. He looked for the first time like a man trapped by his own life. I don't care what they think. You say that now, she whispered, her voice breaking. But you will. You've spent 62 years building that life, that reputation. I can't ask you to risk it, and I can't live my life as a secret, waiting for the other shoe to drop. They stared at each other across the chasm that had opened between them. The love was still there, a painful pulse beneath the surface of pain and distrust. But now it was poisoned by reality. The beautiful intimacy they had built was shattered by the harsh light of the outside world. Melanie loved Sebastian, but she didn't know if she could survive the shadow of Judge Downey. They tried. In the days that followed, they tried to pretend that the conversation had never happened, but it was impossible. The innocence was gone. Melanie, now living back in her own small apartment, felt like a visitor in his penthouse, an outsider. She second-guessed every word she said, every outfit she wore, constantly feeling inadequate. The easy intimacy was replaced by a heavy sadness and a constant unspoken tension. Sebastian, for his part, tried desperately to bridge the gap. He started telling her about his work, about the cases he was presiding over, trying to integrate her into his world. But his stories of legal battles and powerful adversaries only made her feel smaller, his world more alien and intimidating. He suggested they go out to a quiet, discreet restaurant, a test run in the real world. But the entire time, Melanie felt the weight of unseen eyes, imagining the whispers, the judgments. The joy was gone, replaced by a crippling anxiety. The final break came a week later. She had come over for dinner, and the silence between them was so heavy it felt like a physical weight. She looked around the magnificent apartment, at the breathtaking view, and she felt nothing but the suffocating pressure of a life that would never be hers. She knew what she had to do. It was the hardest decision of her life, and it felt like ripping out her own soul. I can't do this anymore. Sebastian, she said, her voice surprisingly steady, though every word was a shard of glass in her throat. He looked up from his plate, his face a mask of weary resignation. He had felt it coming. Don't, he said, his voice low. Don't do this. I have to, she said, tears beginning to stream down her face. I love you. I love you so much it hurts, but I don't love the person I become when I'm in your world. I feel insecure and frightened, and constantly on display even when we're alone. I'm not built for this life, for the scrutiny, for the shadows. I would never ask you to live in the shadows, he said, his voice raw with a pain that mirrored hers. We can face this together. I will protect you. How? She asked, a humorless, broken laugh escaping her lips. By hiding me away forever? Or by watching the world pick me apart? I'm not strong enough for that, Sebastian. And you shouldn't have to choose between me and the life you've spent a lifetime building. He stood and came to her, kneeling before her chair, taking her hands in his. His grip was the desperate grip of a drowning man. You are not a choice, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You are a necessity. I will retire. I will walk away from all of it. We can go anywhere. Live a quiet life. None of it matters without you. The agony and sincerity in his voice were a knife to her heart. This powerful, controlled man was on his knees, begging, stripped of all his pride. And that was what made her realize she had to go. And you would grow to resent me for it, she whispered, pulling her hands away. I will not be the woman who destroyed the great Judge Downey. Your world and mine, they were never meant to collide. She stood up, her legs trembling. I have to go. Melanie, please, he begged, his voice breaking. This place was just a structure before you. You made it a home. Don't make me go back to living in a mausoleum. She leaned down and pressed a final, ghostly kiss to his forehead. You were home to me, too. she whispered against his skin. Goodbye, Sebastian. She turned and walked toward the door, not daring to look back, because she knew if she saw the devastation on his face, she would crumble. She opened the door, stepped out into the hallway and closed it behind her. The final soft click of the lock echoing like a gunshot to the heart. She had left the fairy tale behind, choosing the harsh, lonely reality over a love she believed would ultimately destroy her. Life without Sebastian was a grey, soundless landscape. Melanie threw herself into her work, landing a small but significant design project, working until her muscles ached and her mind was numb. But it was useless. Every quiet moment was filled with the memory of him. Every beautiful sunset was a painful reminder of the view from his windows. She had chosen her independence, but she felt more trapped than ever, a prisoner of the love she had given up. For Sebastian, the penthouse had become a tomb. The silence he had once cherished was now a deafening, mocking roar, amplified by her absence. He went through the motions of his high-powered life, but his focus was shattered, his judgment clouded by the constant aching memory of Melanie. He had spent his entire life believing his strength lay in his control, in his logic. He was wrong. He had made the biggest mistake of his life, not by hiding who he was, but by letting her walk away. The world he had tried to protect felt hollow and meaningless without her in it. 2 agonizing weeks passed. 2 weeks of silent misery for both of them. Then one rainy Thursday afternoon, Melanie was at a coffee shop, sketching in her notebook, trying to find some semblance of her old self. The bell over the door jingled and she didn't look up. Melanie, her head snapped up. Her heart stopped. There he was, Sebastian, standing in the middle of the crowded coffee shop, looking completely out of place in his impeccable suit, holding a simple black umbrella. He looked tired, older than she remembered, and his eyes held a raw, desperate vulnerability. He didn't say a word. He just walked to her small table, his gaze locked on hers. He ignored the curious stares of the other patrons. He stopped in front of her. "You were wrong," he said, his voice low and firm, but thick with raw emotion. "So you said our worlds were never meant to collide." He placed a hand on the table, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping to an intense whisper meant only for her. "So I have decided to tear mine down until it fits with yours." Tears welled in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" "I submitted my resignation this morning," he said, the words hitting her with the force of a tidal wave. "From the bench. Effective in 30 days. I am retiring." "No," she gasped, shaking her head. "Sebastian, you can't. Your legacy, your life's work. You are my life's work now," he interrupted, his voice fierce with a conviction that left no room for doubt. "You said I couldn't choose. But you were wrong. I can, and I choose you. I choose a life where I can hold your hand in a coffee shop without causing a scandal. I choose a life where my only legacy is the man you love. I don't want to be the Honorable Judge Sebastian Downey anymore. I just want to be your Sebastian." This was the biggest gesture he could have possibly made. He, the fiercely private man, the pillar of the judiciary, was not just exposing himself. He was dismantling his entire world for her. He wasn't hiding. He was surrendering completely. He held out his hand. "Come home, Melanie. Not to my penthouse, but to our home. We will build a new world, together." The patrons in the coffee shop had faded into a blur. There was only him. Not the judge, not the legend. Just Sebastian. Her Sebastian, offering her not a gilded cage, but a future built on the rubble of his old life. She stood up and, without a word, threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his chest. "I'm already home," she cried, hugging him tightly. He held her, his entire body trembling with relief. He looked down at her face, the face he loved more than life itself, and kissed her, a kiss of reunion, of forgiveness, and of a love strong enough to tear down empires and build a new world. It was a kiss that promised not a fairy tale, but something far better. An imperfect, complicated and utterly magnificent reality, together. Have you ever felt a connection so strong you would change your entire world for it? One that makes you brave enough to choose love over everything else? Tell me your story in the comments. I read them all. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you what it's like to find a love worth fighting for, hit that subscribe button. There's a new romantic journey every night. Because the greatest love stories aren't about finding a perfect life, but about building one together.